Welcome, everyone. My name is Linda Hershkovitz, and I'm the president of the New Israel Fund of Canada. Thank you for joining us at this very exceptional 14th annual Shira Herzog Symposium. As we begin, I would like to acknowledge that here in Toronto, we're on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and that this is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So a year ago, when we first invited our supporters to last year's Shira Herzog Symposium, we were all set to talk about the growing democratic crisis in Israel. Then just days before we gathered, October 7th happened. We were shocked and reeling, but we gathered anyway in order to comfort each other and hear how our community, here and in Israel, was responding in that moment. We were there for each other when the heartache began. Today, we gather again to be here for each other as that heartache continues. We gather to commemorate that Black Day and all that came after it, and we do it commensurate with our values, to recognize its unique horror for Jews and for Israelis, and also with compassion for everyone who suffered that day and continues to suffer in the year that followed, whether they are Jewish or Palestinian or indeed Lebanese. We also observe this day while looking at the reality of Israel itself. The reality is that Israeli society has been for years steadily accelerating towards a crisis over what kind of country it wants to be. Will it be liberal democratic? Will it be messianist annexationist? That crisis is now. Before October 7th, Israeli civil society was mobilizing hundreds of thousands of Israelis to oppose this coalition government's judicial overhaul. Immediately after October 7th, it was again Israeli civil society that provided aid, answers, and moral authority, while their government instead continued its corrupt and annexationist goals. And now Israelis are again in the streets, still in the streets, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, demanding the return of the hostages and a path to a peaceful future. And the NIF community around the world, including us here in Canada, has mobilized to fund them and support them every step of the way. Israeli civil society, supported by the New Israel Fund, helped to fill the void left by the government's woeful response after October 7th by helping internally displaced Israelis with basic needs of shelter, food, and psychological support. We helped them to defend against intense pressure to shut down dissent and silence the voices of families of hostages and others. We help them also to defend the civil rights of Palestinian citizens of Israel and Palestinians under occupation. We help them to feed people in Gaza. We help them mobilize Jewish-Arab partnership and prevent violence from breaking out within Israel. We did all of this and more. Today we gather to stand in solidarity with these Israelis and follow their example as they turn their loss into drive for change. That is what today is all about. So one of the most powerful examples of that determination and compassion happened on July 1st. Happened on July 1st during the largest gathering of the Israeli peace camp since October 7th. 50 organizations and 6,000 Palestinians and Jews came together in Tel Aviv to share their grief, frustration, and determination in the knowledge that the only way forward is together. This is a video from that event. We're bringing it here to you today because we know that no matter your ethnicity or national origin or religion, we all want the same thing, peace and security. Let's listen to them now.
אני יותם קיפניס, בן קיבוץ בארי. ההורים שלי, הדוד שלי והמטפל של אבא שלי נרצחו ב7 באוקטובר. 10 מבני ובנות משפחתי נחטפו לעזה. 9 שוחררו. אחד מהם, טל, עדיין שם. הוא חייב לחזור הביתה.
أنا بشير الزيادني من رهط، عمري 28 سنة، طالب أكاديمي وناشط اجتماعي. في 7/10 انخطفوا 4 من قرايبي وقتل قريب آخر. 2 من المخطوفين عادوا و2 ما زالوا في الأسر. اليوم أنا بتطوع في منتدى عائلات المخطوفين لإعادة بقية قرايبي اللي ما زالوا في الأسر.
שמי אילנה קמינקה מצור הדסה. איבדתי את בני הבכור והאהוב, סגן ינאי קמינקה, שנהרג בקרב ההגנה על בסיס סיקים ב7 באוקטובר. ינאי עבד בלראות את הכאבים ואת האור בכל אדם, ואנו ממשיכים בדרך שלו.
אני יעקב גודו, בן 75, חבר קיבוץ נען. איבדתי את בננו תום שנרצח בממ"ד שבביתו בקיבוץ כיסופים. על קברו נשבעתי שאעלה לירושלים, אשב מול הכנסת ואתבע את התפטרות הממשלה והעומד בראשה. אני שם, במאהל, עד שהם ילכו.
أنا ثابت أبو راس ابن مدينة قلنسوة، وبسبب النكبة في العام 48 تم الفصل بين عائلة أمي وعائلة أبي. عائلة أمي تعيش في مخيمات اللاجئين في غزة، حيث استشهد 24 من أفرادها منذ 7 من أكتوبر. يجب وقف الحرب حالا والتقدم نحو سلام يضمن الحقوق المتساوية للشعبين في الوطن.
אני נוגה פרידמן, בת 42 ואם ל3 מבן שמן. ב7 באוקטובר איבדתי את עידו רוזנטל אהובי, לוחם של דג שנפל כשעזר להציל את קיבוץ אלומים. אני לא הסכמתי לשלם את המחיר היום הזה, ואני לא רוצה שאף אחת משום צד תסכים לשלם אותו. זה קשה מדי.
אני אבי דבוש, התגוררתי כ16 שנים בעוטף עזה, בבור חיל, שדרות ונירים. ב7 באוקטובר שהיתי עם משפחתי למעלה מ30 שעות בממ"דים בנירים, תחת התקפת חמאס, עד לפינוי לאילת, וכיום לבאר שבע. אוטוטו מוסמך לרבנות ישראלית, מייסד תנועת הפריפריות ומחבר הספר מרד הפריפריות. אני מאמין.
אני נועם דן, בת קיבוץ דן בצפון המופקר, חיה בירושלים, בירת ישראל המפוצלת, אמא של בועז ובארי איילה. ב7 באוקטובר נרצחו בקיבוץ ניר עוז דודתי כרמלה ודודניתי נויה, זיכרונן לאהבה. ביום הארור הזה נחטפו 3 מקרובי משפחתי. 2 מהחטופים שבו, עופר עדיין שם. מעל 9 חודשים אני נלחמת על חיי החטופות והחטופים שנותרו בשבי, ועל תקומת המדינה שלנו.
אני ליאת אצילי, אשת חינוך מניר עוז, אלמנתו של אביב אצילי ופדוית שבי.
לפעמים מתחשק לי להזמין לדו קרב את האיש שרצח את אבי והרס את ביתי, ושילח אותי, עירום ועריה, לכל הרוחות של עולם הבריות הצר.
فإذا قتلني أكون قد ارتحت وإن أجهزت عليه أكون قد انتقمت.
אבל אם יתגלה במהלך הדו-קרב שיש ליריבי אימא שממתינה לו,
או אבא שמניח את כף ימינו על כברת הלב בחזהו בכל פעם שהבן שלו מאחר אפילו רבע שעה מעבר למועד שובו, או אז לא אהרגהו אם הכנעתי אותו.
كذلك أنا لن أفتك به إذا ظهر لي أن له أخوة وأخوات يحبونه ويديمون تشوقهم إليه.
או שיש לו אישה הששה לקראתו, וילדים שאינם אוהבים כשהוא נעדר, ושמחים במתנות שלו.
או שיש לו ידידים וקרובים, שכנים ומכרים, חברים לתא המעצר.
שותפים לחדר בבית החולים, רעים לספסל הלימודים, שמתעניינים במעשיו ומקפידים לומר לו שלום.
אבל אם יהיה ערירי, כרות עץ משפחה, שאין לו לא אמא ולא אבא, לא אחים ולא אחיות, לא אישה ולא ילדים, בלי חברים וקרובים ושכנים, בלי מכרים, בלי רע או עמית, בלי ידיד לרפואה.
فأنا لن أضيف إلى شقاء وحدته لا عذاب موت ولا أسى فناء.
רק בזאת אסתפק, אעלים עין ממנו כשיתקל בו ברחוב.
ואשכנע את עצמי שהתעלמות בפני עצמה גם היא סוג של נקמה.
ביאליק אמר, ארור האומר נקום.
ואנחנו נוסיף, ברוך האומר נקום.
ברוך האומר נקום. ברוך האומר נקום.
So on that stage, you may have recognized our friend Tabet Abu Ras, the co-director of our funded partner, the Abraham Initiatives, who spoke here in this very building during our symposium 2 years ago. These people are not nameless to us. We know them. They are our partners. All over the region, people are being killed and displaced and traumatized. Everyone is suffering. Israelis displaced from the south, Gazans injured, displaced, homeless, mourning. The hostages and their families, Palestinians experiencing violence in the West Bank, Israeli victims of sexual violence who will spend years recovering from their trauma. 17,000 children in Gaza who are now orphans. Israelis displaced from the north, Lebanese families displaced from near the Israeli border, and all of us around the world watching, deep in pain and anxiety. How can we take their trauma as a rallying cry to push us towards peace and security for everyone? Some people say you can't care for Israelis and Palestinians at the same time. I don't believe that. I believe that what makes me human is that I can have compassion for both, for all. I believe this is an overriding Jewish value. We are humbled that this room today includes members of the Canadian Muslim Arab community who share our values. We see you and we care about you and your community here in Canada, in the Middle East, and around the world. Thank you for caring about us too. After this year of heartache, it can be hard to find hope, but let's look for that today. Recognizing the special nature of this time, we turn to reflection and prayer. We pause and take a moment. We set aside our ruminating, our hopelessness, our late-night doom scrolling, and reflect instead on our shared humanity and common aspirations. To help us do that, I welcome up here 2 members of our NIFC's new rabbinical and cantorial cabinet, Rabbi Aaron Levy and Cantor Cheryl Wunsch. to help us express our unique Jewish pain and our universal pain for all lives lost and broken.
We invite you to rise in body or spirit as you are able. Dayan almanot va'avi yetomim al na techeshev tit'aphak ledam Yisrael shenishpach kamayim hamtzeh menucha nechana על כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהרים כזוהר הרקיע מאירים ומזהירים לנשמותיהם של כל אלה שנפלו במתקפה ביום שמחת תורה בשנה שעברה. חיילים וחיילות, אזרחים ואזרחיות, תיירים ופועלים ממרחקים, זקנים וילדים, שנרצחו ושנשחטו ושנטבחו ושנשרפו וכל ישראלים ופלסטינים תמימים שנהרגו במלחמה שבעקבותיה. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירים בסתר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבם, ונאמר Amen. Let's turn to our prayer for the hostages and read together in English. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses and Aaron, David and Solomon, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless, protect, and guard those missing and those kidnapped who were taken from their homes, their villages, and their kibbutzim, from military posts and from fields of joy and dance, and who are now in mortal danger in a foreign and hostile place, under the guard of dangerous emissaries of destruction. As we and all of the people of Israel pray on their behalf, may the Holy Blessed One be filled with compassion for them and bring them out from darkness and the shadow of death. May God break their bonds, deliver them from their distress, and return them swiftly to their families' embrace, to their villages and their homes, and to their fields of joy and dance. and may the verse be fulfilled for them. And the Eternal's ransom shall return and come to Zion with singing, crowned with everlasting joy. Gladness and joy will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee. And let us say, Amen.
I'd like to invite you to join me in singing Achenu. This is a prayer that also expresses a fervent desire for the return of captives, and it comes from the traditional weekday prayer service. I'll sing it first with the words, and then just as a nigun, a wordless melody. Feel free to join me with either, and the words are available both in Hebrew and in transliteration. Achenu kol beit Yisrael, Achenu kol beit Yisrael, Anetunim batzara, batzara uvashivya, Ha'omedin bein bayam uvein bayabasha. Ay, 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 di, ay, ay, ay. Ay, 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 di, da, 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 di, da, da, ay, 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 di, da, da, ay, ay, da, 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 di, da, da, ay, ay, da. Hamakom Yerachem, Yerachem Aleihem, V'yotzihem mitzara, V'irvacha, U'me'afel alehora, Mishiv'od, Ligula hashta, Ba'agalahu vizman kariv. Ha-da-da-da-da-da-da, ha-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, ha-da-da-da, ha-da-da-da-da, am-ba-da-dee-da-da-da-da-da, ha-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, ha-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. We'll now say a prayer for the state of Israel, which I've adapted from a prayer written by Rabbis for Human Rights. Feel free to join me in Hebrew. Ribon ha'olam, kabel na berachamim v'ratzon et tfilatenu למען מדינת ישראל, ממשלתה וכל הדרים בגבוליה ותחת שליטתה. הווה לכך שנהיה שותפי אמת עם אזרחי ישראל, פועלים לקראת את העקרונות שהציבה לעצמה ישראל במגילת העצמאות. תן לכל העוסקים בצורכי ציבור את אומץ הלב, התבונה והכוח לעשות רצונך בלבב שלם. הדרך אותם בנתיבות שלום וענק להם את הראייה להכיר את צלם אלוהים בכל אדם. חזק את מגיני ארץ קודשנו והגן עליהם מפני אויב חרב סכנה ויגון. תא בהם עוז להגן על מולדתם והעצל עליהם את גבורת הנפש לכבוש את יצר השלטון והכוח. הרק את ברכתך על הארץ ועל כל יושביה. ימצאו בה צדק וזכויות אדם לכל אדם. השרש בלב כולם את מוסר נביאיך, עשות משפט ועבד חסד, והצנע לכת עם אלוהיך. פרוס על ישראל ועל כל תבל את סוכת שלומך, יהי רצון מלפניך, שיאמרו כל יושבי תבל, הנה טוב מאוד, כי יתברכו במדינת ישראל כל משפחות האדמה, ותהיה לאור גויים.
When There is Peace, a poem for our future by Itai Flesher. After the bombings of Gaza cease, the hostages come home, and all the displaced residents from southern Lebanon and northern Israel finally return to their homes, there will be immense spiritual and moral reckoning. Palestinians will mourn at the graves of Tamar and Yonatan Simantov, and their beautiful children, Shachar, Arabel, and Omer, who were all slain in what should have been their safe room in Kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th. Israelis will mourn at the graves of Mohammed Abu al-Qumsan's 4-day-old twins killed in Gaza, his baby boy Aser and baby girl Aisel. They will remember his wife Jumana Arafah, a pharmacist who survived the whole 9 months of pregnancy in Gaza throughout the war, only to be killed 4 days after she brought her twins into this world through a miraculous cesarean birth. The Palestinian Prime Minister will lay a wreath at the Nova Memorial, and the Israeli Prime Minister will lay a wreath atop the ruins that were once Gaza City, formerly the most populated Palestinian city on earth.
When there is peace, few will forgive, none will forget, but all will commit to ensuring that no such horror is ever repeated. When there is peace, our children will learn that Hashem and Allah want this land to be shared, and that what is hateful to you must never be done to others. When there is peace, Jews, Muslims, and Christians across the world who support Palestine and Israel will again be able to break bread together, share their faiths, and find common cause in their Abrahamic traditions. When there is peace, the greatest battles between Israel and Palestine will be in the European Cup final and Olympic judo mat. When there is peace, nations of the world will look to this land as a beacon of hope where anything is possible. All this can happen when there is peace.
You may be seated.
Thank you, Rabbi Levi, Cantor Wunsch. This annual gathering bears the name of a strong Israeli-Canadian woman who was a leader for progressive Jews, our beloved Shira Herzog. She was a philanthropist, a columnist, and a supporter of Israel who never shied away from criticizing it all the same. This year we mark 10 years since her untimely death from cancer. We've come to use this event and Shira's legacy to honor someone who's made a deep impact on Canada and Israel. This year, we choose to highlight someone we've lost in the past year, Vivian Silver. Vivian Silver was well known to many of us in this room right now and across the country from Victoria to Halifax. She was a lifelong member of Israel's feminist and peace movements, including deep personal ties to the people and organizations of the New Israel Fund around the world. As Canadians and as believers in peace, Vivian's life touched many of us personally, as did her brutal death. For more than 5 decades, Vivian Silver dedicated her efforts and passion to bringing people together in dignity, cooperation, and mutual respect. With a keen eye and an open heart, she fostered equality between women and men, between Arabs and Jews, and actively strove for peace in the region. Her life's work is an example of the power of leadership and a beacon especially for women of all ages and backgrounds. That is why it's so moving to me that NIFC is a partner to Vivian's two sons' efforts to turn the loss of their mother into a drive for change. Chen and Yonatan, in partnership with the New Israel Fund, have launched the Vivian Silver Impact Award to ensure that her legacy of activism, persistence, and hope continues into the future. The prize will be awarded annually to two women, one Palestinian and one Jewish, who show great promise or have demonstrated significant accomplishments in one of the areas that embody Vivian's values and actions. Building Arab-Jewish partnership in Israel, establishing peace between Israel and Palestine, and advancing women's full participation in decision-making and leadership. Here now are Chen and Yonatan to tell us briefly about their mother Vivian and about her values.
I think we can say that she was a real people's person, with the way she managed relationships and friendships, and her curiosity for people, for the human condition. We couldn't, finish a dinner at a restaurant without her knowing everything about the waitress. And all of her work was based out of interpersonal relationships. And I think that's what a part of what made her so impactful and known all over the world is not just the work she did, but how she did it. Like the empathy she always expressed to others, and the concern, and like Chen said, she was a really devoted friend, to the extent that I think that a lot of people felt that she was their best friend. She was definitely more polite than
I mean,
than other Israelis.
Right. She was definitely very Canadian in that sense.
But I guess also in her values, we can base them. I think we can trace them to Canada in terms of more trust for your peers or for your state, a sense of pursuit of common good, and the ability to acknowledge wrongdoings or victimhood or stuff like that. I'm not Canadian in the sense that I grew up in that culture, but I guess that we can attribute some of her the way she developed her values to Canada, to the way to the environment in Canada. It seemed very fitting to honor our mother in a way that brings to light others, because we felt that she in her life was always someone who empowers. That was one of her main missions in whatever she did, was to empower others. So it seemed fitting that her commemoration will shine a light on the work that is being done in the present by other women. And also we know what it's like to be in the peace camp or on the left in Israel. It's a pretty lonely lifestyle, and sometimes you get marginalized, and sometimes even persecuted. So we wanted to create a a new, I don't know, establishment that validates and acknowledges the struggles and the wonderful things that are being done.
You know, sometimes it feels to me like to the international community, this is like a football game where you root for the side who's biggest victim. And justice for the victims. Yes, the just victims need justice a lot on all sides, but we want justice for not for our grandparents. We want justice for us, for our children and our grandchildren. So, and as Jonathan said, this can only be solved in coming together, because the Palestinians are not going to go away and Israel is not going to go away. Neither of them have anywhere to go.
I think that, you know, seeing from Israel, looking at North America or Europe, and seeing people importing our conflict to their countries, and all the polarization of these pro-Palestine or pro-Israel camps. And I feel, and I also talk to my Palestinian colleagues here, that it's really unconstructive. And I think that a real and genuine effort should be made in Canada for sure, because I think it's easier than other places, but in all the international community an effort should be made for interfaith projects and mobilization that calls for peace and the end of the conflict, and not just to continue the polarization, because a pro each side doesn't help our sides. If you're pro-Israeli, so when you march only with the Israeli flag and only for Israeli interest, without understanding that the only way for us to be secure and the only way for us to exist as a country is by achieving peace and the end of the conflict. And for Palestinians to not realize that the only way for Palestinians to be liberated and to enjoy equal rights is through the ability to reach peace and end the occupation and the conflict. That will only happen in a shared effort.
We can't help but be inspired by the determination of Chen and Jonathan, as well as the Jews and Palestinians you saw earlier on that stage in Tel Aviv. We now turn to our panel to discuss the broader picture and go deeper into both the troubling past and the worrisome future. Particularly, we want to shine a light on Israeli civil society, the hundreds, if not thousands, of large and small grassroots organizations who have picked up leadership of their country while the government has failed. How have they grown and changed over the past year or 2 years? What have they learned? What obstacles have they faced? Where do gender issues and women's leadership factor in? How have notions of Jewish-Palestinian shared society evolved? Ultimately, how are they fighting for a better Israel, a democratic future, and peace and security for the region? To lead us through these questions, I turn the panel now over to our moderator, Sylvia Bashevkin, to introduce our panelists and lead our discussion. Sylvia is Professor Emerita at U of T, a renowned scholar of women's rights and political leadership, and a member of NIFC's board of directors. And as I am very proud to say. Sylvia, over to you.
Thank you, Linda. Can everybody hear at the back? Wonderful. So I want to introduce our two panelists today, and we're delighted that on screen we'll have attorney Raghad Jaraisy, who's the co-executive director of Sikkuy-Aufoq. She was appointed in April of 2023. And with me here on stage, Esther Sivan, who's the director of Shatil, which is the New Israel Fund's initiative for social change. So I'm delighted that both Raghad and Esther are here, whether virtually or on our stage, to share in this conversation. So I'm delighted that they're willing to participate in this symposium, because this allows us to start a conversation where I can ask both about your backgrounds. So I'll begin with Raghad and Esther. Can you tell us a bit about your personal path toward activism? What was the key push that propelled you toward making change? So Raghad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sylvia. I can hear myself twice. We can fix this. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be with you today, and a special thanks to NIF Canada, Ben, and the team for making this possible, despite everything that is going on. I want maybe to start by saying how much I really wanted to be there in person, to meet you face to face. But, you know, in wars, as in wars, sometimes the circumstances are stronger than us. Unfortunately, due to the latest development, I had to cancel my participation in order to stay with my family. I am speaking to you in very difficult days, following the escalation in the war. Over the past few days, we have been living under constant threats. Sirens send us in and out of shelters if we're lucky enough to have one, and we hear the sounds of bombing throughout the day. My children are no longer going to school, and the fear of what might happen next is always present, so I'm really sorry for speaking to you from far away. I am originally from Nazareth, the capital Arab city in the north of Israel, known for years as the political heart of the Palestinian minority in Israel. Living and growing up in Nazareth had a great influence on my personality and the path I chose in life. As a kid, I grew seeing the gaps between Nazareth and Nof Galil, or Nazrat Elite, the city that I live in today, a neighboring city to Nazareth, which was established in the 50s as a Jewish settlement as part of the Israeli government Judaizing the North plan. Today, Nof Galil is a mixed city with more than 30% of Arab residents, including me and my family. But as I said, Nof Galil was established as a Jewish settlement on the historic lands of Nazareth and the other Palestinian villages in the area that were confiscated after the establishment of the State of Israel. And while Nazareth suffered, as a lot of other Arab townships in Israel, from extreme discrimination in land, planning and zoning, education, budgets and resources, had no parks or almost no open spaces, no industrial zones, Nof Galil was a dream city in the making. It had it all. Because of the government investment in Nof Galil, that was a strategic national investment in the area of the north. Living in Nazareth, I also lived and grew up during the Second Intifada, exactly 24 years ago this week, in 2 days, and witnessed the killing of 13 Arab citizens of Israel by the Israeli police. 3 of them were Nazarene. I have tens of other examples and reasons for why I grew into activism. I can talk about my own family's history, the loss of land, instability or security, and more and more. But above all, I think that my main motivation to get involved in activism is my need to be part of the change and to influence my reality and to really act for a better future for the generations to come.
Thank you, Raghad. Esther, can you tell us a bit about your background, how you got involved as an activist?
Sure. So first of all, it's really both an honor and a pleasure to be here in these difficult times. So you understand that the warmth of being part of a larger community that cares about what's happening in Israel and Palestine is really heartwarming these days. And I'm happy to be here, though I'm constantly thinking of what's happening at home. I am from Jerusalem, and what has been very influential for me are kind of 2 points in my life. So first of all, I was born to a father who has been severely wounded in the 1948, the independence war in Israel. And though he was a soldier in that war and was wounded, as I said, he was really a fighter for peace. All my life, I grew to a father that has been speaking to the Palestinians even when it was forbidden, even when it was banned by Israeli law to speak to the PLO. So my father and some other peace activists used to go to Ramallah and Jericho and meet the Palestinians and, of course, have them meet them and discuss what both nations can do towards peace. So I grew up to this kind of atmosphere that things can change even though the situation might look very extreme, or if there's a lot of hatred and fear, there's still something to look up to. The second point is actually when I went to university and I studied law, and I went to this lesson and this professor that taught us about critical legal studies. So that is actually looking at the law and the legal system with critical lens. And he sent us to read articles by some feminist, very important feminist thinkers, like Carol Gilligan and Catherine McKinnon. And it suddenly changed the way I looked at reality. Suddenly, by putting on these lenses, I saw everything different than it was before. It was really one of the, I think it was a very crucial point in my life. And then I started working in civil society. It was very obvious for me that as a lawyer, I will not go to a law firm or to even not to public law, but I wanted to take the law and the legal system and have it work for not only for women, but for weak societies, for minorities, etc., etc. I started my career at the Israel Women's Network with a person that led the Israel Women's Network, Alice Shalvi, and she was really a mentor for me. And then everything else was, I didn't have any other choice but to stay in activism and to try and make change and make Israel a better place for everybody to live in.
Thank you. So for those of us here in Canada, we see both of you as leaders of organizations. And it seems as if you have at least two major sources of pressure on how your organizations operate in this moment. One is the reality of an extremist right-wing government and the threats in Israel that that government poses, beginning with the judicial revolution starting in early 2023. Then, of course, we have the events of October 7th and the ensuing war and the enormous consequences of conflict and trauma on all sides since October 7th. So I'm wondering if you can give us a quick snapshot of how the first set of pressures related to the current government affect what your organization does and how it goes about fulfilling its mission. So let me begin with Raghad, if you can talk a bit about the challenge of the current government for Sikkuy-Aufoq.
Our organization, Sikkuy-Aufoq, works to dismantle the structural inequalities that separate Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel through direct action aimed to change and improve government policies. So since day one of the current government, we have understood that we are facing a new major challenge. And our assessment of the risks of this government that we did in a very early stage, I remember in 2023, maybe in February or March, and that was based to a large extent on the analysis of the coalition agreements that is the base for this government, showed that if completed, the coalition agreements and the actions of the government will influence our ability to operate or our purposes in three different areas. First of all, it will weaken the legal basis for equality and partnership. It has already weakened the legal basis for equality and partnership. There are different tools that the government did use to do so and is still using, but maybe the most influential one is the judicial overhaul, which, among other things, will make it much easier to pass laws that discriminate against minorities and especially the Palestinian society in Israel. And it will weaken the civil service, the bureaucracy level in the government ministries. It will politicize the bureaucracy level that are our partners in the government and that will limit our ability to operate and influence policy change. And we're already seeing that. We saw this in 2023. We see it even more since the beginning of the war and October 7th. And also, it will affect the media that will become much more partisan and less critical and less independent. So this together is something that really affects our ability to operate as an organized Jewish Palestinian Arab organization operating and promoting equality and shared society in Israel. The other area is that this government is weakening also the material basis for equality and partnership, not only the legal basis, by redirection or cut of funds that were already approved for social and economic development in the Arab society that were a result of years of joint actions by the representatives of the Arab society and civil society and also partners in the bureaucracy level in the different government ministries that were crucial for narrowing gaps and for the development of the Arab society. They also reframed the struggle against crime in the Arab society, which was the major threat to the Arab society a day before the war. We were facing criminal organizations in each and every township in the Arab society. Only in 2023, 244 people were murdered by criminal organizations in the Arab society. In 2024, and even after the war, 171 civilians were killed so far by criminal organizations. So what the government did is that it reframed the struggle against crime in the Arab localities as a struggle against national crime. It became a national issue. And that made using violence, police violence, much easier, not only against criminals, but also against civilians. And the other aspect of influence of this government is that it weakened the cultural basis for equality, and it's still trying to weaken the cultural basis for equality and partnership by different initiatives. For example, the legislation that they tried to pass in order to forbid the display of the use of the Palestinian flag in Israel and limit the freedom of expression and the expression of the complex identity of Palestinian citizens of Israel. And also weakening civil society by taxing and penalties. So we see the influence of the government in many different areas that we operate in and that are crucial to our ability to operate. And we've been doing a lot with this. We've been doing a lot of monitoring for successes and maintain as much budgets and resources as we can to continue the gap narrowing and investment in the Arab society. We are working with the media on the coverage of the issues related to the Arab society and the presence of the Arab society in the media. We were strengthening our connections with the bureaucracy level in the ministries because last year they needed us much more than we needed them. The good bureaucracy in the ministries just needed the connection to the civil society because it was the connection to the ground and it was the pressure that could be put on the government from the outside in order not to continue with its discriminatory policies. And that's only examples that started in January 2023, but continued and maybe became harder and harsher since the beginning of the war.
Thank you, Raghad. So Esther, can you give us a sense of how this government has affected Shatil's work and your work?
Yes. Maybe I'll use the opportunity just to say a few words about Shatil, what we actually do. So we are the action arm or the arm in the field of New Israel Fund, meaning we work very closely to communities and to organizations, to NGOs in the north of Israel, in the south of Israel. We have 2 branches, in the center of Israel, with all the human rights, shared society, social justice, religious pluralism work, and we really work very close with them. And our theory, or theory of change as it's called in the social world, is that the stronger they get and the more professional these organizations get, so they'll be able to be more influential and to create really this social change that we all aim at. And our role in this is, first of all, really to train them and consult them with these capacities of how to be more professional, how to be more influential, and organize them together. So if there's a group of 10 organizations that deal with shared society issues or 20 organizations that work on gender equality, so we bring them together, we coordinate them, and sometimes these groups cooperate, and together they can make a bigger impact on society. So this is the way we act. And in relation to your questions, so first of all, of course, we realized it's not only judicial and it's not a reform, but rather an overall that relates to the regime itself. So it's not only judicial issues that are raised, but it's something that really relates to gatekeepers, relates to Israeli democracy. And seeing that, we took, first of all, our Center for Policy Change is a center that deals with policy change, that really marked the different subjects that are on the table and said, well, the first thing we see is, I'll just give you an example, okay? So there was starting in this government, before, of course, the 7th of October, this government started in January 23 with its program of judicial coup or overall or whatever we can call it. And one of the first things it did is take the tax law. And through the tax law, they wanted to tax NGOs that act in Israel and receive money from what they call foreign entities. So foreign entities can mean actually NIF Canada, it can mean any foundation of philanthropy, but it also can mean, and that's what they aimed at, foreign governments that give money to organizations in Israel because they feared of international influence on what's happening in Israel. And you know, many organizations in Israel, including universities, research institutions, receive money from the EU, from the American government, from different European governments, from the Canadian government. So we saw this as a push towards specific organizations that mostly deal with human rights, peace, these issues that sometimes do not get money from the Israeli government, of course, and have to raise their funds from foreign entities or foreign governments. And we fought against this law that was supposed to be legislated. And you know, with this government, it's very hard to fight against the law because it has a coalition of 64 Knesset members that support it. But we did, I'm happy to say that we managed to move this law, this specific law, from the agenda, but you can never know what's going to be the next thing tomorrow morning that is raised. And so we are working mainly on blocking, I must say. If in former years or in the change government, we worked with the government, we encouraged NGOs to work with the government, to receive funds from the government, and not to work against the government constantly. Now, unfortunately, we cannot really promote legislation. We cannot bring our issues and promote them through the current Knesset or government, except for just, you know, very, very few cases that we were able to promote something. But we are with the strategy of blocking. So that's where we are in these terms of looking at what the government does and can do for us.
Thank you. So to go back to the second part of the question about what's unfolded since October 7th, I'm sure, Raghad, your introductory comments reminded us that children are not in school and people are running to shelters who have them. And there are many, many immediate challenges that are being faced today. But if you can give us a general sense about, since October 7th, how your organization's work has been affected by those events, if it's possible to separate that from the current government. I realize it's more of a political science exercise, probably, than something that's possible in the real world. But I'll ask you, please, to give us your reflections on that set of pressures, please.
Well, since October 7th, our lives have changed in ways we could not have imagined. The war has brought devastation, fear, and immense suffering to so many families and so many people in Israel and Palestine. And as I said before, our lives before the war were far from being perfect, not to be mistaken, but the war has made our work even harder. The atmosphere is one of fear and anger. The silencing and persecution of Arab voices has intensified since the war began, with our community under constant scrutiny and pressure. And many Palestinian citizens of Israel, like myself, feel the weight of being silenced during these times of conflict. And maybe to give you just an example, only last week, few incidents occurred that are great examples to what has been going on since the beginning of the war. A 12-year-old girl in Beersheba was reportedly attacked for saying there are innocent children in Gaza. A pharmacist was fired simply for wearing a ring with words from the Quran on them. And the Bedouin man was physically assaulted by a soldier at a gas station. So these are only 3 examples, but they reflect a broader reality where hundreds or perhaps thousands of incidents of harassment, persecution, and silencing directed at Arab citizens of Israel. And the government is really exploiting the war and the heightened feelings of fear and anger among Jewish public to push its racist agenda. The government is using the war in order to push its agenda that was established before the war and that we saw black on white in the coalition agreements. And the consequences of these discriminatory policies are severe. They deepen the rift between Jewish and Arab citizens. They weaken the democratic fabric of the society and sow seeds of hatred and division that will harm all the society and not only the Palestinian society. And as Sikkuy-Aufoq, when we analyze the implications or influence of the work on our strategy and on our work, we identify, I think, 3 distinct critical areas where there was influence. First of all, the relationship between Jews and Arabs. The public discourse today in Israel is a discourse of fear and hatred, us or them. There's nothing in the middle, and Palestinians with their conflict identity as Palestinians and citizens of Israel are absent from this discourse. The media coverage is ignoring the challenges or the needs of the Palestinian community in Israel, and we see this all over the country. And also, people just feel afraid that their personal safety is threatened in the public sphere. They feel afraid of one another. And that, of course, affects our work and our ability to continue building a shared society. We need to repair or restore the damages before continuing our past actions. The other area is the area of the status of the Arab society within the Israeli society. We saw delegitimization to the complex identity of the Arab citizens as Palestinians and Israeli citizens, of course, not to mention any recognition of collective rights. And we saw also targeting of specific groups in the Palestinian collective in Israel, like the residents of the unrecognized villages and the Negev, who were targeted since the beginning of the war. And the third area is the area of social and economic development that I referred to before, that was, of course, affected by the government, but the effect and the damage was bigger after the war because of the damages to education and employment in the first weeks of the war. Unemployment rates in the Arab society just got up. The jump was higher than the unemployment rates in the general society. Unemployment rates of Palestinian women also was raised to a high extent in the first weeks of the war. And also the more and more cuts to the basic budgets of the Arab society as much more than the average cut to the general budgets of the society because of the expenses of the war, and less allocation of budgets to the needs of the emergency needs of the Arab society. And what do we do with all of this? We did 4 things. First of all, we tried to maintain past achievements. We tried to save what we can save, as Esther talked about. We tried to prevent escalation in the relationship between Jews and Arabs. We tried to prevent more cuts to the budgets. We tried to fulfill the needs, the emergency needs of the Arab localities and the Arab citizens, and more and more. Second, we tried to prevent additional damage. An example, only tomorrow, there is a very important voting on a very dangerous legislation that will allow the intervention of the general security services, the Shabak, in the education system. It will allow them to interrogate educators and teachers based on expressions and, practicing their freedom of expression and more. We were successful in preventing or postponing that vote a few months ago, but it is back on the table of the Knesset, and we are doing a lot of effort together with Shatil and our allies in the civil society in order to postpone it or prevent it again. Third, we try to continue with our ongoing programs. We try to work not only on emergency and war, but also on things that and policies that will continue narrowing gaps and developing the Arab society for the future, because nobody is doing this if we don't do this. The government, that's not on its agenda. The Arab society and the Arab localities are weak and are drowning with emergency needs. And if we don't take care of the day after, then gaps will not only go into a static era, but also will go back into a deep increase in the gaps between Jews and Arabs. And the last thing is that we are already thinking about rebuilding and restoration. The needs are huge, the damages are big, and we can't wait for the day after the war. It's a long war, and we need to rebuild the society and restore the damages while the war is going on. We have no other option.
Thank you, Raghad. Esther, can you reflect a bit on the last year?
Yes. So we started right after the 7th of October with really emergency work on the ground, where different fragments of the Israeli society were, of course, harmed by the 7th of October itself and the following war, of course, that joined. One of the issues we dealt with was in the Negev, where there was no protection from missiles and no alerts of the sirens to the Bedouin citizens of Israel that live in the unrecognized villages in the south, because their villages are not on the map. So in most of the unrecognized villages, there were no sirens heard and there were no alerts when the war just started, and people did not have shelters. So it's not only that the alerts weren't on, but there weren't any physical shelters to go to. And of course, it's the role of the government both to alert its citizens and to build these shelters, but at the very initial stages, it was philanthropy. It was philanthropy or other citizens who just paid for these concrete rooms in order for the Bedouin residents to be protected. So that was the first thing, and of course we took with that also advocacy. So now the situation is different, of course. The state of Israel takes care, and there are alerts all over, and also shelters built. But of course, since we live in an emergency time for nearly a year. But also other things rose, especially in the field of shared society. Yes, so first of all, we saw organizations that have both Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel working within the organizations really harmed, because people were really, really emotional and still are. After the 7th of October, the war and its implications, people died on both sides, and it was very hard to run an organization, even if it's not dealing with shared society or not directly dealing with the implications of the war or human rights, but just to keep going and to do your things and to come every day to work. So we operated a kind of a resilience training, helping the directors and the staff of these organizations keep on working together, first of all, and keep the routine, if there is such a thing, of the everyday work of the organization. The second thing is what Raghad mentioned, and Sikkuy is a great partner to us in many of the things that we do, but also in working on de-escalation. There was that threat that the tensions between Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel would rise, the same as it did in May 21 after the last operation in Gaza. And we really worked with different organizations, each of them using their own strategies. Some do campaigns, some do community work, some do policy work, but all of them got together and worked to reduce the escalation, and the escalation was reduced. We didn't see, we hardly saw cases of really rising tension between citizens of Israel, which I cannot attribute it only to our program, but I think we did have a contribution to that work. So we really took these instances of the war into consideration. Another important thing that NIF has developed is what we call the protection hub, the Civil Society Protection Hub. What does it mean? It was actually formed before the 7th of October, but it has become much more in use after the 7th of October. This is the place where people who, because freedom of speech, because they spoke and their words, it relates not only to Palestinian citizens, but a few cases that, for example, teachers in schools expressed their own personal views about the war, and they were threatened they will be fired. Or the same case that Raghad mentioned about that 12-year-old pupil from Beersheba that said she can identify with the innocent Palestinians in Gaza these days. And the deputy mayor of Beersheba said, well, she should be expelled, deported from Israel. Her family should be expelled. We are talking about citizens of Israel and of a 12-year-old girl. Artists, people just wrote or didn't even write on social media expressions, but they were interrogated and sometimes arrested just because they said their views. So the Protection Hub really works on the different aspects of what can you do in such a case. Yes, you can turn to legal assistance. You can ask for a larger community response. So you can sometimes write to the government. You sometimes want to make big petitions that the government or whoever is in charge, or the police or whoever is in charge, will feel this is not only an individual case that is going to be silenced. This is a case where we have community that supports these people and want to show the government that this is an Israel still, that justice should be done for all. And the Protection Hub really works on giving protection, and the most, the change since the 7th of October is that we also provide not only organizational consultants and this kind of help, but also emotional help, also psychological and mental health help, because we see that the trauma of the war and the trauma of the 7th of October are not going to disappear so quickly. I mean, people talk about post-trauma. I think we are not in post-trauma. I think we are in trauma still that applies to every person, every individual and community in Israel. And we do what we can do to help people in civil society or people that have suffered from these phenomena.
Thank you, Esther. So Esther, in your comments you mentioned resilience, and we know that both you and Raghad are leaders in civil society. But I'll speak as somebody who lives in Canada. I watch the Israeli news, and it looks like we're living in a much earlier time. Before there were women who had places of power on the public podium and in the society at large. It seems particularly for the last year, but even before October 7th, under this government, men were dominating the headlines. There are, of course, the military commanders, there are the political leaders. There's far fewer women in cabinet now than there were under the previous Shinui or change government. And to the extent that we see women visually or hear from them, they seem to be outsiders to power. They seem to be the nurses and the social workers, the women who've survived sexual violence. They're protesting in the streets. Their mothers mourning the loss of their sons and so on. So my question for both of you is this a fair assessment? From your vantage points, have recent developments pushed Jewish and Palestinian women in Israel farther toward the margins? So Raghad, if you can reflect on that, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, the short answer is yes. And maybe I'll let Esther talk more about the national level, but I can talk about the Palestinian women. First of all, less Arab representation in the Knesset means less Arab women in position powers, because the Arab women in politics in general are never the leading actors. They are always second or third or fourth. And when you talk about a reduction in the representation of the Arab parties in the Knesset from 7 years ago to 8 today, then there's a reduction in the representation of women in general. But I want to talk more about Palestinian women activists since the beginning of the war. And I want to talk about the level of the government policy towards those activists. The Israeli police and the Israeli government, since the beginning of the war, and as part of the silencing and persecution processes and policies, was knowingly targeting Palestinian women who expressed their opinion through social media, Instagram, Facebook, or any other media, and interrogated them and arrested them for them to be an example for others. The police used the Palestinian women in order to silence other women, because the police knows that we are talking about a conservative society where getting arrested or interrogated is a shame. It's not respectful, especially for a woman. So in the early stages of the war, in the first weeks, we saw a very high percentage of youth, of young ladies and women interrogated and arrested by the Israeli police for posting on Facebook or participating in protests. And what did that do? You know, when a conservative family sees that women are being arrested, they will ask their own woman family member not to go to protest, not to post, and that will have a general effect of bigger silencing on the society and on women precisely. For example, one of the most famous cases that I think Esther mentioned in her previous comment is the case of Dalal Abu Amni, one of the most famous Palestinian singers, citizens of Israel, who I think days after October 7th just posted on her Facebook a sentence from the Quran saying, La ghaliba illallah, nobody wins but God. This is a very used sentence in Arabic, meaning nobody wins in war. We all will lose. And she was arrested and interrogated after this, and she was attacked by the mayor of Afula, the city she lives in, and by activists. Part of the election campaign of this mayor in the last elections, municipality elections, was around her and wanting to expel her from the city. And she is suffering up until now. I think that the police chose Dalal Abu Amni not only because she's famous, but also because she's a woman. And there are more than one example of such women who were targeted because they were women, and the targeting of them affected women in the whole Palestinian society in Israel.
Thank you.
So I'll continue with saying I think so there's a slight change, I'm talking about the national level, in what we see in relating to gender representation since the war, or the last 2 years, or since the beginning of this government. So first of all, I must admit that we see more women on the news, but they are usually either military experts. So now, you know, in former times, they used to bring only generals, and you could see a whole panel of men sitting and discussing security and war and peace and every issue, and hardly see a woman. But I must admit that there has been a change, and I think it's because some journalists, women journalists and men journalists, are more aware of gender issues, so they sometimes bring more women that talk about these issues, so women aren't only portrayed as victims, or it's not only looking at them you know, as an object, but more as experts. On the other hand, we still, of course, see the usual tendencies that we see everywhere. You know, when you talk about education and health, yes, it's women. When you talk about security and state issues, yes, it's men. We know that in the current government there are 5 ministers, women ministers, out of, it used to be 31 ministers, now it's reduced. And in the current Knesset, there are 30 women members of Knesset out of 120, so it makes 25%. But Israel is on the low side of the indexes of gender disparities, also in terms of representation of women. And I think here there's a question that I think you related to, Sylvia, where is it enough to have representation of women, or do we really want progressive values to be up on the stage? Do we see these women that are government ministers? Do they promote liberal ideas? Do they promote equality? Do they promote social justice? Do they not promote racism and Jewish supremacy? So the answer is no. We see the women in our government are not better than the men in our government, and I think that's the issue. I think the issue is not gender equality. The issue is is how do you take the values that I thought the State of Israel was built upon and have them deliver the message. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's probably many people in Canada who would agree that it's more about the values than the demographic characteristics of people in power that matters.
The only place where it is very important, and of course NIF supports this, is the religious parties that have no women at all, not as members of Knesset, and of course not as ministers. And I think there we should support the groups, the religious, ultra-Orthodox groups of Haredi and religious women that fight for a place in leadership, and that's really crucial.
Thank you. So I want to ask you each quickly just about your groups and the struggles that you're facing in this particular time. So Raghad, if we were to ask you about Jewish-Arab partnerships, what would you say distinguishes Sikkuy-Aufoq, which is a long-standing partner of New Israel Fund here in Canada? How can your group in this time effectively advocate for basic values like equality, given what you've told us about the directions of the current Israeli government?
Well, it's hard. I can't hide that. But we do our best. Well, for the last 33 years, Sikkuy-Aufoq has been involved in the struggle for equality and shared society for the Palestinian and Jewish citizens of Israel. Sikkuy is a truly shared organization with two joint directors of the organization, executive director, a Palestinian and a Jew, two executive board presidents, co-board presidents, and two directors for each of our departments. And I think this DNA of being able to work together as Jews and Arabs, even in those dark times of war, and even under this government, I think it's crucial for our ability to operate and our ability to continue promoting our goals for equality and shared society. You know, Esther talked about Shatil's programs for supporting organizations. And since we were one of the organizations who really benefited from those programs, I have to say that since the beginning of the war, one of the main things that we have been involved in is the well-being of our staff and of our organization, and of making it possible to continue working together as Jews and Arabs under those very, very complex circumstances. How do we succeed? We succeed when we do risk and opportunity assessment again and again, each period, each 2 or 3 months, and we try to understand where are our strengths and weaknesses, and how do we operate under those circumstances. One of the things that I think helped us in the small successes that we had is our ability also to work in collaborations in the civil society. We all understood that we are facing major challenges, and from day one of the government and of the war, we were able to build a strong civil society that was really able to operate even under those circumstances. We were able to reduce the amount of budget cuts to the Arab society. We were able to prevent de-escalation in the relationship between Jews and Arabs. We were able to stand on our legs as human beings and as organizations in this very, very tough period. And we are also able to plan for the future, and that is a success in itself. So I think that those are part of the reasons why we are being able to operate today, even if the successes are less and the circumstances are very, very hard.
Thank you. So I think that note of optimism in terms of, standing vertical and, in a defensive position is very encouraging. I'm wondering, Esther, can you also give us some optimistic sense. I know that Shatil is trying to prioritize the following objectives. You want to advance a society grounded in justice, equality, human rights, and the rule of law. And you've told us about all the difficult threats that are facing each of those. So if we want to conclude here on an optimistic note, consistent with what we've heard on being resilient and managing to be vertical on a defensive position, if change creates opportunity, and maybe we're on the cusp of potential breakthroughs toward light rather than deeper darkness, where are your rays of hope in these times?
So, so first of all, I gain my hope from civil society in Israel. You know, one of the programs that NIF Canada supports is a great program where we have women in middle management positions in organizations, both Palestinian and Jewish, come together for a program of over 6 months that is called the Tzameret, Kama, and that's a top tree, I think. How do you say the top of the tree? And these women are our future. I mean, these women are the future of leadership for a just and equitable Israel. And we really see that when you invest in what we call sometimes the infrastructure, when we invest in people that can be our next leaders, I think that gives me hope. I think what gives me hope also is the fact that, you know, we have in our staff also members, Bedouin members that have families in Gaza, that their families were killed. I mean, they don't exist anymore. So one person in my staff I spoke to on the phone on work issues, and then he said, well, you know what happened yesterday? That happened yesterday. And I was, first of all, of course, I was shocked and cried together with him, but I understood that the fact he came the next day to work and continued working with Jewish people, with us, to make Israel a shared and a good place to live in. And he's the one who actually has in mind our new program in the Negev that works with the kibbutzim and with the development towns and with the Bedouin citizens, and bringing all these understanding that all these groups need equality and rehabilitation and to get out from that trauma. I think that gives me hope.
Thank you. Thank you for inspiring us, and we'll conclude with comments from Ben Moraine. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you to Sylvia for guiding us through the conversation. Thank you to Esther for visiting. Thank you to Raghad for working with us so hard to make sure that she could be here and in Montreal on Friday virtually also. Thank you to the members of our host committee, the members of our board, and our 20s and 30s leadership team who worked hard to fill this room. Thank you to our staff, Hannah Blazer, Laurence Barshisha, and Zoe Bernard, who, despite a last-minute 3-week jury duty of a key member of that team, pulled this event off today. So I'm so proud of them and us and of you. Immediately after October 7th, NIF sprang into action. We did work we'd never done before. We provided immediate humanitarian aid to displaced Israelis. And we were among the very, very first to fund the hostage families and their advocacy. And we continued in the days afterwards to do our core work that has always been our work for democracy and equality, and to do even more of it than we have ever done before in the millions. We ramped up initiatives that promoted Jewish-Arab partnership and combat extremism. We bolstered democratic norms in the face of rising Jewish supremacist rhetoric and intense pressure to shut down dissent. We worked to defend the civil rights of Palestinian citizens of Israel, Palestinians under occupation, and the very right of protest for Israelis of all kinds. We launched a special campaign to feed people in Gaza. We did all of this and more. They did all of this and more. And as we approach the one-year mark of October 7th, we are more determined to chart the course, the necessity of a path through this mess towards a better future for everyone in Israel and in the region. Our work is animated by these three principles as we move forward. Partnership. We cannot retreat into silos. It is only through deep partnerships that we can overcome the challenges that we face, especially between Jews and Arabs, but also religious and secular, between Israelis and the people abroad. NIF was built on partnership, and through partnership, we will move forward. Pushback. We will not let extremists inside the Israeli government and outside the government define a new, terrifying normal. We will continue to push back on policies and practices that further harmful goals like annexation, the judicial overhaul, which has not gone, and the continued dismantling of democracy and human rights in so many ways. And our last piece is a full embrace of peace. The only future for Israel is a future of peace with itself and its neighbors. These are not mere slogans. All of our futures depend upon a ceasefire, the return of the hostages, and a negotiated end to the conflict. That is the starting point. No targeted assassinations, no border buffer zones, no technological wonders can replace what a piece of paper continues to achieve today, signed by Israel and Jordan, and Israel and Egypt. That remains the ultimate promise of our safety and our security for everyone. I hope what you've seen today here is a small candle, a little path through some very treacherous waters that is possible. It's not going to be easy. The outcome is not guaranteed. Your help is required. But I hope it is there in your minds nevertheless as something slim to hold on to. So there are things that you can do. If being in a space that is uniquely Jewish and cares for the humanity of everyone and the lives of all people in the Middle East, if that was meaningful to you and you're looking for something or for others to participate in next Sunday, please register or share the October 6th event with our partners J Space and Canadian Friends of Peace Now and many progressive synagogues across Canada. I invite you to register for it and partake in that virtual commemoration. If you are inspired by the bravery of Israeli civil society, the true moral leaders of Israel right now, not its government and not, I dare say, its opposition leadership, but if you would like to see them, meet them, understand more, then I'm going to say I invite you, but I dare you to join me in Israel in just 3 months' time. Let us hope that we can go in 3 months' time. I will be there, and a dozen of us are ready to sign up. Please join us for our annual study tour. We'll spend 6 days meeting the people that make civil society possible, that array of impressive, determined Israelis who stood on that peace event stage. Please consider coming with me. You should also consider giving generously to the New Israel Fund of Canada. Help us to fuel and propel Israelis who share our values in the fight for Israel's soul. For their sake, for the sake of our friends there, for the sake of everyone in the region, and also for our sake too. Through these past months, it's been their example that has enabled me to get through these tough times. And it has also been this community from Canada, from coast to coast in Canada, that has also enabled me to get through these times. Your support, your words of kindness, your shoulders to cry on. We are wounded, but we are getting back up again. It is too much to say that we are healing, but we are determined to move forward nevertheless. So we invite you to stay after, to enjoy each other's company. There'll be cookies and coffee at the back. For our 20s and 30s leaders, you're welcome to use the room at the back to get to know each other a little bit better as well. Thank you so much for being here. Shana Tova.